I'm Dr. Adrian Ryan. At the time this video is being recorded, which is in 2020, I am the coordinator of the course CLS 2602. Please do forgive the odd haircut. It's lockdown and no hairdresser was available, and I'm not terribly good at this sort of thing. What I'd like to do today is to talk about how you would read a Roman coin, and I'll give you a step-by-step example of how to do this. In CLS 2602, you often get coins and you're asked to discuss the coin and comment on the background of the coin or contextualize the coin, something like that. I just want to give you some background on how you would go about doing that and show you some step-by-step examples. This assumes, though, that you do have some understanding, that you have read the bit in the study guide about numismatics. If you haven't, please go and read that before you continue with this video lecture. But I should tell you that this video lecture is pretty important. It's worth your going through this, particularly given that you have a portfolio exam coming up pretty soon. So what should you expect from this lecture today? Well, what we'll be doing is we'll be learning how to find out more about a coin that you see, typically when you're given a coin as part of an assignment. But you could be doing anything else, and you see a coin and you want to find out a little bit more. We'll be learning about one way in which you can go about doing this. You will also be seeing some examples in action. I'll be showing you how to do this with reference to two coins, and these are the coins that you see on the right there. Both of them were issued for Marcus Brutus, a very important historical figure in Republican Rome. And throughout this, I'll be trying to give you some tips on how you can answer assignments involving coins. What you won't be doing in this lecture is getting a thorough grounding in numismatics. In fact, I've already said in the beginning that you should read the study guide section on coins and numismatics. But even then, the purpose of this course is not to give you a thorough grounding in numismatics. That is a very, very vast and complicated area of study. So you won't be getting a thorough grounding. You'll really just be introduced to getting started on researching a coin. Now, when I say researching, I also want to be clear that I'm not talking about conducting original research, right? So you're not going to go through the steps that I show you today and be able to publish an article on coins. Instead, if you go through the steps that I mentioned today, you'll be starting. It will be a good starting point for answering an assignment question in which you're asked to interpret or discuss a coin. So I just want to give you a brief outline then of what we'll be doing. First, I'll be giving you a brief introduction to the resources that you will use. These are online resources and books that you might want to use when researching a coin. But don't worry, everything I show you today can be done online. Secondly, I'll be giving you an explanation of how one might go about examining a coin. Basically, the coin has these two parts. There's the legend and there's the imagery. So the first thing you want to do is search for the legend, and you'll find out a whole bunch of information from that. And once you've done that, that might help you interpret the imagery and the symbolism. So I'll be explaining how you would do that in practice. And then I will apply this to the two coins that you see here. The one at the bottom is in the study guide, the one on the top is not. Now, before I go on with the rest of the course, I do want to just explain some terminology. The text on the coin we refer to as the legend. Okay, so I'll be using that term often. I'll be talking about the legend, and that just means that text, the coin. So on the top, it's M. Brutus Imp Costa Leg. and L. Brutus Prime Cos. So that's the legend. So I'll be using that term very often. The second thing I just want to talk about is the terms obverse and reverse. So obverse and reverse are very similar to heads and tails, the obverse being heads and the reverse being tails. Now, the obverse is usually the side on the left. It is the more important side. There are some technical ways in which one can determine which is the obverse and the reverse of the coin. Very often we equate the obverse with heads, but do be careful. If you look at the top image, there are two heads there. And it doesn't matter whether or not you have two heads, right? A coin will always have one side that is referred to as the obverse and one side that is referred to as the reverse. Occasionally, like the coin at the top, you'll have scholars not agreeing on which is the obverse and which is the reverse. But for the most part, it is fairly straightforward. So I'd just like you to know that obverse is the most important side of the coin, the reverse is the less important side of the coin. They equate roughly to the idea of heads and tails, but please don't use heads and tails when you describe an ancient coin. You'll come a cropper, and in any case, some coins have two heads, right? But there's no coin that has two obverses or two reverses. Every coin has one obverse and one reverse side. And yeah, so let's go straight into it and discuss the online resources that you will be using. Okay, so before we go on, let me introduce you to some online resources that will help you in the investigation of the coins that you're looking at. I'm going to break them down into two different kinds. The first are handbooks. Now, handbooks are kind of quite cryptic in terms of how they discuss the coin or how they describe the coin. They are very, very succinct, and they use a very condensed, precise language. I'm going to give you an example of that just now. The second type of online resource are tools that you'll be using to just conduct searches. Now, I'll deal with these first. I'm sure you've used JSTOR before. This is a repository of academic articles that goes back quite far, and UNISA students have a subscription to JSTOR. So you can go onto JSTOR, search with some keywords, and we'll find articles that match those keywords. Some of those articles can be quite difficult to read for a second level student, but JSTOR is otherwise a fantastic source. So the next one is obviously Wikipedia, the infamous Wikipedia, bane of many academics around the world. Wikipedia is edited by groups of people, and that often means that it's open to certain kinds of abuse, and it can also sometimes not be terribly accurate. Now, I say that with the proviso. Articles that are popular get edited a lot, and they tend to be very accurate and quite good, because if somebody makes a mistake editing it, someone else will come and correct them almost immediately. So if you go and look up the Kardashians, for example, Wikipedia is going to be spot on. There are some areas in the sciences in which Wikipedia is also spot on, but as you get into more and more arcane areas like ancient history, you'll find that there may be certain things that aren't quite on point. For example, people may use old books that are not up to date, and people also may be quite credulous, and that is too trusting of some of the ancient sources. Now, you are doing ancient history, and as a result, we want you to become more and more critical of the ancient sources, and we don't want you to fall into the trap that some people who edit Wikipedia pages do occasionally fall into, and that is being too trusting of the sources. So use some care with Wikipedia. I will give you examples from Wikipedia in this lecture, and I will show you how you can actually, what Wikipedia is useful for. Far better resource for classics is the Oxford Classical Dictionary, which is aimed precisely at classicists, and it is also aimed not only at undergraduate students, but even academics use the Oxford Classical Dictionary. So that really should be your first port of call. Most of the examples I'll give you today will be in Wikipedia because it's just simpler for me to do it that way. But the Oxford Classical Dictionary really should be the first resource that you choose. Now, later on in this lecture series, I will explain to you how you get to the Oxford Classical Dictionary via the UNISA's library webpage. Now, I think a lot of what I've told you about these research tools you already know. But the research tools that are specifically dedicated to coins and numismatics, you probably won't be familiar with. So I'm just going to briefly talk about them, and I'll give you an example of one. These are handbooks that describe various coins. So typically what these handbooks do is they'll give you a very concise description of the coin, possibly a picture, and it's generally the patterns for the different coins. I'll show you what I mean just now. So it will give you it will tell you what is on the obverse and what is on the reverse of the coin. And it will just give you a little description, and then there's often a discussion of a particular type of coin. The Crawford's 1974 book called Roman Republican Coinage, which is usually abbreviated RRC, is the standard reference work for the Republican period. This is basically just the period preceding 27 BC. Pause and look up the Roman Republic if you don't know what that means. Okay. So the two coins that we'll be dealing with are actually Republican coinage. After the Republic, from 27 BC onwards, we have the imperial period. And the standard source work for the imperial period is Mattingly and Sydenham's Roman Imperial Coinage, often abbreviated RIC, from 1923. There are two other catalogues from the British Museum that you'll find referenced in many of the articles that you read, called BMCRR, that is dealing with the Roman Republican coinage, and BMCRE, that deals with the imperial coinage. Now, you don't really need to worry about those last two, the British Museum catalogues. I'm just telling you about them so that when you see something like BMCRR somewhere in a catalogue or in a Wikipedia entry or on ancientcoins.com or anything like that, don't panic. It's just telling you the reference number in that catalogue, in the British Museum's catalogue. So don't worry too much about that. What you do need to know a little bit more about is Crawford's 1974 book, Roman Republican Coinage. And what I say about RRC, the Roman Republican Coinage, is pretty much going to be is going to be relevant to RIC as well, to Mattingly and Sydenham's Roman Imperial Coinage. Remember, RRC deals with the coins before 27 BC. RIC deals with the coins after 27 BC. Let's look at this entry from RRC in order to explain what it is that RRC actually tells you, and what RRC actually is. So let's go to the line at the top. There's a number, 506. There's some text. M. Brutus, imp, in part with Costa leg. That's the legend. Okay, well, it's one part of the legend that uniquely defines this series of coins. Then you've got mint moving with Brutus. That's just telling you where the coin was issued. Okay, now Brutus was of course running around all over the place. At this stage he was being pursued, so the mint was moving with him. Okay, so 43 to 42 BC is the date that the coin was issued. So that's the top line. That 506 is a reference to this particular set, this particular series of coins that have this particular legend on the obverse. But another way of looking at what RRC is doing is really telling you about design templates. Remember that a coin is struck from a die, which will have the image onto it, which is imprinted on the metal. And so you'll have a lot of coins with the same design on them. And so it's probably more correct to say that RRC is a catalogue of the different designs rather than a catalogue of the different coins as such, because many coins would have the same design on them, because one die produces lots and lots of coins. The 506, together with the 1, the 2, and the 3 underneath, you'll see it's got 1 Aureus, 2 Denarius, 3 Quinarius, refers to coins with similar design and struck with very similar dies. Okay, so the 506 really refers to that obverse that obverse legend, and underneath that you will have a list of denominations, Aureus, Denarius, and Quinarius, and what design template you have on those denominations of all the coins that have that particular legend on the obverse and which have a similar design pattern. Now the thing is, that number 506 is quite important because your RRC is organized roughly chronologically, and it is by the particular personalities for whom the coin was issued, like Julius Caesar, Brutus in this case, etc. So that then is roughly chronological, okay, in order. The number in RRC, you just have all these entries in numerical order. And as you go through, so if you're told that a coin is 506/1, then you know when you want to look the coin up, you just flip through RRC till you get to 506. And then underneath that you look for number 1, Aureus plate 61, as you see there, and then you'll have a description of the coin underneath that. So that's really how these catalogues work. Now, why that's important to you is because when you search for coins, online if you go to wildwinds.com or to ancientcoins.com or something like that, they will usually put an entry, and that entry will have something like they'll put this catalog number there, RRC 506/2 or /3 or whatever, and that tells you that you should look in RRC and you should flip to entry number 506, and then underneath that go to whatever number they say and read that, and that's the description of the coin. Okay, so this is a page from RRC. You're probably not going to need to use RRC, the physical book, anyway, because you can get most of this information online, but I thought I'd just show you anyway what it looks like. One of the coins we're looking at is actually 506/1, and that is number 506 and the Aureus, the number 1 there. Let's not look at the left side, let's look at the right side. I just want to quickly point out here that I've mentioned before that this particular coin, that scholars disagree on what is the obverse and the reverse of this coin. RRC has the sign with M Brutus, imp, Costa, leg, as the reverse of this particular coin. So let's, but it doesn't matter really too much when we discuss this coin. This is actually quite unusual that people disagree on what is the obverse and what is the reverse. So I'm just going to go and look at the reverse side of the coin and what RRC says about it. It says head of Brutus, R dot. R dot just means that it's facing the right. Bearded just tells you that he's got a beard. Above tells you that above him is written M Brutus Imp, and below him is written Costa Leg. And then oak wreath as a border. You can see that there's an oak wreath as the border there. Now in the outline, I mentioned that there are two parts to examining the coin. There's reading the legend and understanding what the legend says, and then there's the bit about interpreting the imagery and the symbolism. So I want to start then with talking to you about the legend, how you read it, and what it can tell you. The legend that you've just seen had a lot of abbreviations in it. And so the legend can actually be difficult to read if you're a novice. Don't worry too much about those abbreviations, and I'll tell you why. Because you're usually going to search for that, and the abbreviation will be explained somewhere. But they do use a lot of abbreviations. Very common abbreviations include F, which means filius, so that's just the son of. Cos, C-O-S, means consul, and was the chief magistrate of Republican Rome. Imp, imperator, which is a word for general, and it was a general who had taken part in a successful campaign, an important successful campaign, was often, would sometimes be cheered by their soldiers and hailed as imperator. And that was a great honor, and they'd often commemorate this honor on their coins. So imperator just means general, but it really refers to this special honor of being hailed as such by your soldiers. Pont M, Pont Max, refers to the Pontifex Maximus, who was one of the two chief priests of Rome. Now these are very important abbreviations during the Republican period. Other abbreviations during from the imperial period are Trib P, which means tribunician power, tribunicia potestas, tribunician power. It was just a power that gave the emperor really the right to represent the ordinary people of Rome, the common people of Rome. PP means pater patria, father of the nation. Now, there are lots of these. I could go on and on and on. And the point is that don't be too scared when you see them, because if you search for the legend online, it will tell you what those abbreviations mean. You'll find out more about those abbreviations in the various websites that you go to. Just quickly, what the Romans do is they also abbreviate first names. They only had a small number of first names, so these get abbreviated. C means Gaius, CN means Gnaeus, L means Lucius, M means Marcus, T means Titus, and there are a couple of others as well. But first names are always abbreviated on Roman coin. But as I say, don't worry too much about this, because you'll be able to find abbreviations online. It's not difficult at all. And so don't worry about it too much. And in fact, the first step in finding out about a coin is really to simply search the legend. You read the legend and you search for it. The easiest way to search for it is really to just use Google. Now, usually what will happen if you do use Google to search for a reference is you'll get some numismatic page or some numismatic website where they sell coins, or where someone discusses coins. Right, so that's the first thing. The comments on the site can be helpful in understanding the coin, but please do not stop there, because they needn't be reliable. They often are reliable. Wild Winds, for example, I think is one of the sites that sells coins. Ancientcoins.com. These they can be reliable, but you can't be too sure of that. They're not academic sites. But they can be useful to just get an impression, first of all. So those are the first kinds of sites that you will find. When you search for the legend, sometimes you'll get articles in JSTOR that pop up in your Google search. That can be very useful. You can, of course, search for the legend in JSTOR as well. But JSTOR will give you very intricate articles, very in-depth articles that might be a bit above your level at second year, but you are very welcome to try and read them and see what you make of them. So one thing that you should look out for is any site that has the URL numismatics.org, because that is an extremely reliable site. That is an academic site. It is, it is the go-to site for classicists and actual researchers. So you can definitely trust anything you see in numismatics.org. That is your most trustworthy site dealing with coins. It's got a lot of stuff in that site, including a complete digital catalogue of RRC and a catalogue of imperial coins that in many ways supersedes RIC. Remember, RRC is Roman Republican coinage and RIC is Roman imperial coinage. So those two catalogues are actually online. So if ever you see numismatics.org, you know that it's going to be a trustworthy site. Obviously, when you search for the legend on Google, you're probably also going to get some Wikipedia pages as well. But I'll get into a little bit more detail about that just now. The Australian Centre for Ancient Numismatics at Macquarie University is an excellent website as well. So you can explore the site, the URL is given there. So what is it that you're primarily doing when you research the legend? Well, probably the most important thing that you're doing is you're looking for those historical figures that appear on the coin. Right? The legend generally tells you the name of the person, the people that were involved in the making of the coin. Now these could be the moneyers, so the people under whose authority the coin was minted. But occasionally, actually quite often, it would also include something that was, the moneyer would in many cases be a client of a more powerful man in Rome, and the coin could then have something about that powerful man, particularly towards the end of the Roman Republic. Sometimes the moneyer would put a figure on the coin that referred to one of their own ancestors. And you would be interested in these figures. You'd want to know who the moneyer is. Sometimes they're not terribly important people. But knowing who they are might tell you something about why they have chosen particular motifs and patterns on the coin, and what message they're trying to get out in the coin. So, for example, the coins that we have, the moneyers that we have in this lecture, the moneyers are not that important because they are actually doing this on behalf of someone else, Brutus. So he's the important guy. The moneyers' names are generally quite prominent, but sometimes they aren't. For example, if they've been minted for another more powerful man, we call the powerful person the patron, and the person that does the work for the patron the client. So what sort of information do you want to know about these people? Well, what political positions did they have? Who were they? Who were their allies and who were their rivals? What were they known particularly for? What did they do that makes them historically noteworthy? You might also want to know more esoteric information about them. Were they associated with any particular gods? Did they like certain gods? Did they have a favorite god or something like that? And did they ever use this god as part of their propaganda? How are they thought of? How was that person thought of in the Roman imagination? So you want to find that sort of information out about these historical figures. And then you want to find ancient references to them. Now, in your assignments, you will always get bonus marks for contextualizing the historical information you have by referencing ancient historians that talk about them, and by doing so critically. So you always want to find what ancient sources talk about these figures and contextualize the coins within that, within the historical literature that talks about it. So that's one of the things that you want to do. Another thing you always want to do is ask the question of, does the historical person, if it's a very important historical personality, you want to ask the question of whether they use other media as well. For example, Julius Caesar he was one of the first people, if not the first person, to put his own image on a coin, on a Roman coin, at least. And so he's got his own image. And you might think, well, does his image appear elsewhere? Can that tell us anything about the way he liked to present himself to the Roman people? Remember that coins are propaganda. They have great propaganda value because they're so common and because people see them all the time. So having your head on a coin matters, but you might want to ask whether making sense of what's on the coin, whether you can make sense of what's on the coin by looking at other media that was utilized for propaganda purposes by the person. So did Julius Caesar have other busts, for example? Or were there other monuments that he told you what sort of image he tried to project to the Roman people? So you'd want to know those sorts of things as well. This becomes terribly important during the imperial period, but even during the period of the Republican period, it's worth trying to see whether there are other aspects of portraiture, particularly in sculpture, for example, and in miniatures, that also can throw light on how that particular person, historical person, tried to portray themselves to the Roman public. So having said that, you may ask yourself, well, how do I go about researching these historical figures? So I'd say there are two things. The first is you need to find out about the person, and I've spoken about that quite briefly. The other thing you need to do is to find out the date that the coin was issued. That's really quite important. If you type in the legend in Google, you'll get some site that comments on the coin, and that site will generally tell you the date. In fact, you'll get numismatics.org site, which will give you a reference to RRC, which will tell you the date. And I'll show you an example of that just now. So the date is important because it will tell you something about the historical context. Find out more about that date. 42 BC, for example, we saw in the coin I looked at a little bit earlier. We're going to look and see what's important about 42 BC. So you want to use the date to help you understand some of the context. How is 42 BC significant in terms of Brutus? Okay, so that's a question you want to ask yourself. So find the date when you use the legend, and then know something about that date. Be able to contextualize it within the period. What were the historical and political circumstances, for example, at that time that may be relevant to the coinage? Is the money related in any way to the events? Or is the person depicted on the coin related in any way to the events? Okay, this will help you understand what the propaganda value of the coin actually is and how the coin relates to those events. So that's very important. That's one of the most important things you can do when you're researching the historical figures and when you're researching the legend. So now that I've actually briefly spoken about the legend and how important it is, let's actually have an example of how one would go about doing this. Okay, so this is the first coin that we want to look at. This coin isn't in your study guide, but I think it's a very interesting coin to understand the imagery of Brutus and to just explain as well how you might look at coins, because there's actually a lot going on in this coin. Now, as I've said, the first step you want to do is to look at the legend. Search for the legend online and see how far that will take you. In this case, our legend tells you M. Brutus, imp, costa, leg, and then that on the reverse, L. Brutus, prime, cos. You see, if you look closely at the coin, see the legend go around the heads of the two figures, and that M. Brutus, imp, costa, leg, and L. Brutus, prim, cos. Now, because of this very concise shorthand, it can be very intimidating to read a legend. So you might not know what this means. So you just go about and do the search for it. So I've typed it in Google. Now this might be out of date. I typed this in quite a long while ago, so you might get a slightly different result. But if you look at that, you'll see there's actually a hell of a lot of information just from doing a Google search. Just brute force Google search. I've just typed in exactly what is on the legend. Just type that into Google, and this is what I've got. I've got a book in Google Books, but you might not have access to that. There's something there that says Coinage of the Roman Republic Online, Browse Collection. There is a JSTOR article. There are a couple more things. So notice that the second item says that the URL for the second item there is numismatics.org/ a whole bunch of other things. Now remember, numismatics.org is one of those resources that I said is extremely trustworthy. So that would be a great place to start. Now, what that's going to do in this case is just take you to the entry in RRC. But it's going to take you to the digital entry. The one I showed you was, of course, a scan of a book, of an old book. This is the digital entry for RRC. So this is what happens when you click on that. For some reason, I've got the page in Spanish, but it just doesn't really matter. If you're lucky, you'll get the English page from Google, but it really doesn't matter because the entries are in English. So the one that we're interested in, the one that matches our coin, so just look at the images there, and you'll see the one that matches our coin, RRC 506/1. It's exactly what I told you the RRC entry would be. And it's just a catalog number. And if you notice there, on this web page, it's going in numerical order. RRC 505, then 506.1, 506.2, 506.3. So 506.1 is the one that we're interested in, and you can tell that by just looking to see that that is actually the exact same legend. And it also describes very well the figure. Lucius Junius Brutus, right, okay, he's looking right. Bearded, around inscription, oak wreath is a border. The reverse, Marcus Brutus, imp, costa, leg. Head of Brutus, right. Bearded, oak wreath is a border. Okay, so, and your date, 53 to 42 BC. Okay, now, what information have we gleaned from this? Well, it's expanded and it's told us the names of the people. So let's do a search now for the names of those people. But I just want to remind you that RRC 506 really is, it's just an online catalogue of Crawford's Roman Republican coinage. Right, so let's do a search then for these figures. We've got two, L. Junius Brutus and the one, it just says Brutus, but you know that the M means Marcus. So let's look for M. Brutus first, okay? Marcus Brutus. So stick that into Google, and you get a lot of entries here. Marcus Junius Brutus the Younger. Okay, so remember we are looking at the one name here, M. Brutus. So we're on step 2 there. We've looked at the legend, we've searched for it, and it's told us who the historical figures are, and it's told us the date. So let's look at this figure, Marcus Brutus. Now, we can go straight into the Wikipedia entry. For that, you can access that from, that's the first thing you get when you search for it. And I will tell you about Brutus. Notice the date that he dies, 23rd October 42 BC. So this coin, 43 to 42 BC, is pretty close to his death. If you read a bit more about this, you will see that he was a politician of the Roman Republic, and I'm not going to read through all of this, but you'll find out that actually this Brutus is one of the conspirators that killed Julius Caesar, that assassinated Julius Caesar. And they did so because they felt that they were freeing Rome from tyranny, and they were chased. They fled Rome, and they were pursued by Julius Caesar's leading men. Octavian, his adopted son, it was actually his blood nephew, but he adopted him as his own son, so Octavian, Julius Caesar's adopted son, and Mark Antony, his trusted left hand. And they defeated Octavius, and Mark Antony defeated Brutus and the other conspirator, Cassius. So you'll find all this information if you actually read through the Wikipedia entry. You'll also find that it was in 42 when they were defeated and when Brutus died. But there's actually an even more trustworthy source that you can use to search for the names of the people and to learn a little bit about the historical background. And that is the Oxford Classical Dictionary. And I can't stress enough how important this work is. It's a standard reference in classics. It's a very expensive book that you have complete access to online through the UNISA library. So as a UNISA student, you have access to the Oxford Classical Dictionary. Use this resource. It's really good, it's really important, and you can search it just like you search Wikipedia. But there are big differences with Wikipedia. It is more trustworthy than Wikipedia. It contains little innovative interpretation, much like Wikipedia. And what I mean by that is, if you have a very novel point of view, or you have a particular argument that you want to make, and you don't, and that's very well justified, but it's not a mainstream view, you wouldn't put that in the Oxford Classical Dictionary, and if you put that in Wikipedia, somebody would edit it out almost immediately. Okay, so that's what we mean by little innovative interpretation. They tend to give you the mainstream consensus view on any particular topic. So that's very good. The Oxford Classical Dictionary is much more up to date than Wikipedia on many issues because it's written by an expert in the field who knows what the latest is in that particular area. Whereas Wikipedia can, you might get an expert editing a Wikipedia page, but you might get somebody who's just looked at some books, and some of the books might not be very good books. So they'll be able to justify what they say, but it won't be cutting-edge knowledge. It won't be the most up-to-date knowledge, and it won't be the most trustworthy knowledge of the day. It's useful, but the Oxford Classical Dictionary is far more up-to-date. Like Wikipedia, it has references to both ancient and modern works that refer to the particular topic, and the references are all curated by an expert in the field. And that's the important thing, and that's the reason you should use the Oxford Classical Dictionary rather than Wikipedia. So I want to show you quickly how you'd go about doing that. you first log into the library and do a search for Oxford Classical Dictionary. And when you do that, you'll get a number of entries. So this is what happened when I searched for it. The first entry, Oxford Classical Dictionary, academic journal, that's a physical copy, so don't worry about it. The second entry, Oxford Classical Dictionary, printed material. Again, physically in the library, excuse me, but you don't have to worry about that. Just briefly, we should edit this out. So look at these are the entries that you get if you search for the Oxford Classical Dictionary on the UNISA library page. The first one is Oxford Classical Dictionary, Green, Peter. Don't worry about that. It's an academic journal. It's been grayed out anyway. So you need to log in to see more details. The second entry is the Oxford Classical Dictionary as printed, so it's a hard copy in the library. Don't worry about that because the third entry is an ebook. And that means you can access it online, provided you have logged into the library already. And that's the one we want to do. So click on the bit that says View Full E-Text, View Full Text ebook at World Scientific Access, restricted to UNISA staff and students. So go ahead and click on that. And you'll get, I've just broken the page up there into the top part and the bottom part. You'll be taken to Oxford's reference page and Oxford Classical Dictionary 4th edition. And towards the bottom, you'll see a little search bar. So let's go ahead in that search bar and just type in Marcus Brutus. Or, as I've just done, Brutus. Nothing more, just Brutus. And I get a whole bunch of different entries for Brutus. The first one, Junius Brutus 1, Marcus. The second one, Junius Brutus 2, Marcus. So which one is it? Well, that's very easy. We know the date, right? So if you read the little snippet that it has there about Brutus, says Tribune 83 BC. Well, that seems a little bit early, doesn't it? You look at the second one. I've outlined it in red because it actually is the correct one. We can tell immediately by starting to read. Brutus, alone among the Republicans, put his own head on one of the gold coins. He also won the title of Imperator in Thrace. In 42, he and Cassius, with 80,000 legionaries, plus auxiliaries, twice met Antony and Octavian at Philippi. So 42 is the date there. This must be the guy. So you go ahead and click on that entry. And doing so will take you to a long discussion about Brutus's career. And there's a lot of information there. Obviously, when you're doing your assignment, you want to be quite judicious. You want to select only the most important information there. Another thing you want to do is you want to chase up those references, particularly to ancient sources. So you can go and read those ancient sources, and that will help you contextualize the coin and relate it to the ancient sources. You'll see, for example, here there's a bibliography at the bottom of the entry to modern secondary sources, and there are many references to the ancient sources, such as Tacitus as well. So you can find both ancient and modern references in the Oxford Classical Dictionary, but they are curated by an expert. So please do go ahead and use the Oxford Classical Dictionary. If you're going to use Wikipedia, use it together with the Oxford Classical Dictionary and trust what the Oxford Classical Dictionary says over what Wikipedia says. So just to finish off on this side of the coin then, we've got Marcus Brutus Imperator, Costa Leg. In this case, Costa Leg is not that important. If you search for it, you'll find out that he is actually the moneyer. His name was Pedanius Costa Legatus. His name was Pedanius Costa, and he was one of Brutus's legates, and he acted as the moneyer on Brutus's behalf. but we really don't have to worry too much about the Costa leg. You just need to know who he is, and you'll get that by searching for the legend. Far more important is the guy that appears on the other side of the coin. But it says L. Brutus, not M. Brutus. Okay, notice that, L. Brutus. So, and it's also got that little bit there, prim cos. Now, I've already told you that L means Lucius and cos means consul. So let's see if we can find out any more about this guy, L. Brutus prim cos. If you search for him, you will find out that it's Lucius Brutus, and there are lots of there's lots of information about Lucius Brutus. Let's choose the Wikipedia page, and you'll see why Marcus Brutus chose to put this figure on the back of his own coin. Lucius Junius Brutus was the founder of the Roman Republic. As simple as that. He's the person who founded the Roman Republic. It's probably legend. I mean, it goes so far back, 509 BC. It goes so far back that we can't really trust the historicity of this person, Lucius Junius Brutus. But the legend is that Lucius Brutus overthrew the last of the kings of Rome, a guy called Tarquin the Proud, who was quite arrogant. And he overthrew Tarquin, and he instituted a new form of government in which you didn't have a king who could abuse his power. Instead, you had two chief magistrates who would check each other's power, and they were called consuls. And he became the first consul of Rome, and he made the Romans swear that they would never ever tolerate again a king, a single ruler, a monarch, to rule over them. Whether he existed or not, by convention, the Romans believed that he was the ancestor of Marcus Brutus. So Marcus Brutus believed this legendary figure that founded the Roman Republic was his ancestor. So you must imagine how much pressure that must have been on him to do something about Julius Caesar, who had proclaimed himself dictator for life. There were many people who thought that Julius Caesar was planning on actually becoming king of Rome. Again, something which Marcus Brutus's ancestor had made the whole of Rome swear never to tolerate. So there must have been quite a lot of pressure on Marcus Brutus to join the conspiracy to assassinate Julius Caesar, which of course he did. There's one story that says that Lucius Junius actually executed his own son for trying to bring Tarquin the Proud, put Tarquin the Proud back on the throne. So the idea is that the Romans hated the idea of having a king, and it was supposedly this legendary figure of Lucius Junius Brutus who was so fanatical about never allowing Rome to be under the domination of a king ever again. And so Marcus, his ancestor, his descendant, some 500 years later, found himself as part of the conspiracy to kill Julius Caesar, a man who, it seems, may have wanted to proclaim himself king, and who certainly had already made himself dictator for life. So that's also explains, by the way, the prim cos. It just means the first consul of Rome. Just incidentally, on the Wikipedia page, you'll find there's an interesting entry under the references. Always check those references to the website Libertas, the coins of Brutus. And that website, following that link, is actually very good. It's the link that I told you about earlier on from Macquarie University, and it talks about the coins of Brutus, and you'll find a lot of interesting information there. So we've looked at the legend and we've looked at these historical figures, Marcus and Lucius Brutus. And we now move on to the imagery, which by its very nature is a far more speculative part of the interpretation of a coin. This particular coin doesn't have much in the way of abstract imagery, apart perhaps from the oak wreath that surrounds both of these figures. Now I'll leave that up to you to go and research what an oak wreath might symbolize on a coin. But I'd like to instead move on to the issue of portraiture and whether we can gain anything by looking at the portraiture. I mentioned earlier on that you should, if you have the, if you are able to compare the images on the coin with images in other media. And I have an example here of a bust of Lucius Brutus, the Capitoline Brutus. It's called, it's a Roman bronze. We don't know when it was first, when the original was produced. It might have been the 4th century. The 3rd, some people even say it might have been the 2nd century BC. But it certainly was produced a long time before Marcus Brutus was born. But I think what might be informative is to ask yourself the question of whether either of these two images from the coin, that of Marcus or that of Lucius, in any way resembles the image of the Capitoline Brutus. For myself, looking at those facial features, looking at the triangular profile of the figure of the Capitoline Brutus, looking at the nose, and also the ridge, I would say that it actually bears quite a resemblance to Lucius Brutus. There are differences. The ears on the Capitoline Brutus are higher up, but I think there actually is a bit of a resemblance there. Certainly far more than there is to Marcus. That is subjective to some degree, and you may disagree with me, and scholars actually do disagree on this particular point. But if the Romans saw a resemblance between these two, we have to then ask the question, was the Capitoline Brutus an image, a nice visual representation that Romans could draw upon when you said Brutus, when you said, Lucius Brutus, the founder of the Roman Republic? Is that the image that appeared in the Roman mind? And if so, would the coin, together with the legend of Lucius Brutus, have been sufficient to paint a vivid enough picture of this great founder of the Roman Republic in the Roman psyche? And might that not have served to make far more vivid and far more direct the propaganda value of having an ancestor who also fought to end tyranny and who expelled the kings from Rome? We're in speculative territory, as I've already mentioned here, but these are things that you should consider and you should think about. We'll move on to the next coin now, though, where the imagery is quite abstract, but it is also a lot easier to interpret. Right, well, let's move on to the second coin. Now, this is going to go a lot faster because we've already searched, we already know who Brutus is, so we could search for the legend on this coin, but we're not going to need to do research anymore into the historical background, because we already know the historical background. The coin, well, let's search for the legend to find the date of the coin. So we'll do this by searching for Brutus Imperator L. Plite Kest. We can search for that on Wikipedia. If you do so, you'll simply find Marcus Brutus. You'll find that the coin is also from 43 BC, 43 to 42 BC. You'll find that the name of L. Plite Kest is just the money Lucius Platorius Kestianus. Nothing very terribly interesting about that. So we already know who all these, who Brutus is, and and imp just means imperator because he was hailed as imperator. Alplite Cest, Luciano, who is Lucius Platorius Cestianus, he's an unimportant figure. He's just one of Brutus's lieutenants and the person who issued the coin, the moneyer who issued the coin. So, since we already know the historical background, we don't need to look at the legend in too much detail. There's only one aspect of the legend that's really interesting, and that is, we'll get to that just now, and that is the statement Ide dot mar, but I'll get to that just now. We can instead concentrate on the imagery in the coin. So again, for homework, I just want to ask you the question, just for interest really, not real homework. Just for interest, I just want to ask you a question about the border, these beads on the border. Do they tell you anything interesting? Do they remind you of the oak wreath, perhaps? If you think yes, it's very speculative. Some people say it does, and other people think it's just a decoration. But you can think about it. It's worth musing about, but we can't know for certain whether it has any symbolism. The likelihood is, in my opinion, that it just frames the scene pretty nicely. But it might visually be striking because it reminds you of the other coin. But we've got no way of really assessing that. It's better to look at the stuff that we can assess, stuff that's very obvious. For example, on the reverse, the daggers. That obviously refers to the assassination of Julius Caesar. This is the reason Brutus is in trouble in the first place, for the assassination of Julius Caesar. The cap, that's a freedman's cap called a pileus. And the connotation here is that Brutus has freed the Romans. And so with the daggers, he assassinated Julius Caesar. By doing so, he freed the Romans from the tyranny of a person who wanted to make himself king of Rome. At least that's Brutus's narrative. And this propaganda is important to him because he's trying to win over people. He is now fighting against Julius Caesar's men. The Romans seem to have turned against him, and he needs to win them back on his side so that he can recruit people to fight with him. And the Ide Mar simply refers to the Ides of March, the day on which Julius Caesar was killed. Okay, so the symbolism is actually quite, it's quite easy. I mean, you can search for the coin, and you'll find discussions of all of this stuff. If you look on JSTOR, there'll be articles about it. So you can find this information quite easily. So finally, I'd like to talk very briefly about some of the odds and ends, some of the less the less obvious features of this coin. So we've looked at the symbolism relating to the Ides of March, the assassination of Julius Caesar, and that propaganda value. But let's look at some of the other things, like, for example, these holes that have been punched into the coin. The first thing we can tell is that the hole has been punched in from the obverse through to the reverse, right? Now we can tell that because the obverse has a big hole, and the reverse juts. The hole in the reverse juts out. Okay, so it was punched from the front through the back. Notice the position as well. It seems to be quite interesting. It has been punched from at the top in such a way that if one were to hang it, the face of Brutus would be upright. The coin would be upright. In addition, the face, it was punched with the face in mind, right? It's important. It's above the ring of beaded dots. So it seems that the person may have wanted to ensure that it didn't actually interfere with the image on the field. Now, the question then we want to ask, the question that is raised by this is, why? So there are two obvious reasons that you might punch holes in it. The one might be that you want to keep all your coins in a bundle. The other one is that you might want to use it as a pendant. Now, if you think about keeping your coins in a bundle, this is an RX. This is a gold coin. It's very valuable. Punching it just removes a little bit of the weight from the coin. So it seems like seems like a quite expensive thing to do if all you wanted to do was to attach it to a string so that you could keep all your money together. And if you were doing that, you probably wouldn't care as much about ensuring that the coin remained upright, unless it's coincidence, but it seems unlikely. So I think on balance, it could be for either reason, but I think more likely is that the person who owned this coin way back 2,000 years ago may have had some kind of sentimental significance. Possibly they were a supporter of Brutus, or maybe they just wanted to show that they were rich enough to be able to have a gold coin as a pendant. They wouldn't have had to be very rich, but I mean, the thing is that they could afford to have a pendant with a pretty figure on the front. We don't know, but the chances are that this was used as a bit of jewellery, and that explains the punch hole rather than it was used to keep all the coins together in a single bundle. The last thing I want to do is to come back to this idea of the portraiture, to look at that image of Brutus and ask the question, which of those two? So in the other coin we had two Brutuses. We had Marcus, the person who really caused the coin to be issued. It wasn't the moneyer, but the moneyer was one of his supporters. So we've got Marcus Brutus, and then we have Lucius Brutus, the legendary founder of Rome. And we ask the question, whose image has he put on the coin? Remember, the coin doesn't say M. Brutus or L. Brutus, it just says Brute. Right? So, Brutus, which one is this depicting? And I think from the very prominent cheekbones and the prominent facial structure, that is probably Marcus that is shown. And that brings us nicely to a passage from Dio Cassius. 47:25:1, who says, in addition to these activities, Brutus stamped upon the coins, which were being minted, his own likeness and a cap and 2 daggers, indicating by this and by the inscription that he and Cassius had liberated the fatherland. So I think that shows quite nicely that that image is the image of Marcus Brutus. Now, I'd like you to think about the question of, to me, it really does look as though those two images, the image of Marcus on the other coin and this image of Marcus, are actually the same person. They've tried to preserve the ridge under the brow, the shape of the nose, the high cheekbones, the prominent cheekbones, the head and the structure of the back of the head, for example. So, I think that these are the same figures, but you can have your own opinion on that. What I want you to do, though, is to actually consider and to think about the role that the portraiture might actually play in the propaganda that this coin was the propaganda purpose that this coin was actually minted for. Well, that brings us to the end there. I hope you've found this informative. And if you're faced with a coin that you need to research, that you might at least have some idea as to how you would you would start going about doing the research on these coins and what sort of questions you should probably try and ask. One of the things that I haven't done in this is really tie everything down to the ancient sources, because that of course is something that you couldn't really do in such a short lecture. But that's something for you to do as well. Wikipedia and the Oxford Classical Dictionary have lots of references to ancient sources. So I would strongly encourage you to look at the coins that are in the study guide and go ahead and do some research on them. I know you've already had an assignment that does that, but now go and do this in thorough detail. Try and account for all the elements that you can. Try and relate it to ancient sources. Try and understand the historical background and interpret the coin against this historical background. And if you do, I will tell you now that won't be wasted time at all. You have your exam coming up, and it will be well worth your effort to get into the habit of researching coins quite thoroughly and looking at all the elements and relating them to the ancient source material, and where you can to the portraiture as well. Good luck then.